Thank you so much, Claire E. What a great prayer to get us started. And hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie L. I'm a recovered compulsive overeater. And, I just want to preface my talk this morning by saying I'm going to do my best. Janet, this is Janet's chapter. I always think of Janet as we agnostics. And I'm just going to tell a little bit of my story through the second half of We Agnostics, and I just pray that God speaks through me because really, this is all about God, right? And I just want to start by saying, like in step one, we come to believe. I came to believe in my heart of hearts, not in my head, but in my heart, that I am powerless over food and that my life is unmanageable. And that belief, that real, honest, true belief, not I can say it, not it's not intellectual, but it's believing in my heart of hearts who I am, right? I need power. And how do I access that power? And We Agnostics talks to us a little bit, the whole chapter is about, you know, coming to believe that God can restore me to sanity. And what does that look like? Right. Um, so with that, I want to jump into page 52 where we left off. And I'm going to kind of just real quickly that top paragraph, I'm not going to read the whole paragraph, but it says here, is not our age characterized by the ease with which we discard old ideas for new, right? I came into this program with a conception of a God that A, I couldn't trust, and B, that I didn't believe cared about me enough to take care of this food problem. I had a lot of old ideas about God, about spirituality. Um, I had all these ideas that blocked me from truly seeking this power, right? And it says here, like, and I think Janet uses the example of, I don't know if it was Janet or someone, but this cell phone, right? I turn in my old cell phone because the new cell phone has a better camera and it takes better pictures. And, I accept the fact that I'm getting a better piece of technology, right? I discard something old for something new. Well, can I apply that to God and spirituality and seeking this power, right? And then, the next paragraph, which is one of, I feel the best description of the unmanageability. It's, the bedevilment. And it says, we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view, right? The same readiness to say, maybe, just maybe, the way I've looked at this may not be helpful. Or maybe, just maybe, I need to be open to a new experience with this God of my understanding, to seek this relationship, to seek this power, right? And then they beautifully outline that second half of step one, the unmanageability. Because here's the thing, you know, the unmanageability isn't just when I'm in the food, right? Being in the food and binging uncontrollably. And for me, in my last relapse, and I mean, beyond that, I got to the point where I was eating against my will. Yeah, heck yeah, that's unmanageable. But life can be unmanageable when the food is down. I have days where life feels a little unmanageable, and I'll talk about those self-imposed crises, here in a minute. But they outline this so beautifully, these bedevilments, this manifestation of feeling irritable, restless, discontented, and not having the roadmap to life, right? So, having trouble with personal relationships, that's one. Couldn't control our emotional natures, that's two. And when, what my sponsor did with me, and when I work with sponsees, when we get to this part, I actually have them do writing on this. This was so powerful for me, breaking down each of these 8 bedevilments and then really looking, how does this manifest in my life? Again, not just when I'm eating compulsively, but in my daily life without God. when I'm walking around in self-will without a spiritual solution. This is what my life is like, you know? So one, I'm having trouble with personal relationships, not able to control my emotional nature, right? I'm self-will run riot, full of self-pity. The next one, number three, we were a prey to misery and depression, right? That's my normal state without God. And that's the beauty of working these steps, because not only do I get to live a life free of the obsession, the merciless obsession to compulsively overeat, but I get to live a life where I'm seeking God, and I'm trying to show up differently in my life, because these bedevilments, I like to think of it as like an open wound. And I'm just oozing self-pity, right? And nothing. I'm running from thing to thing to thing to thing to try and feel better, and nothing works. The next one, we couldn't make a living. Well, that didn't necessarily, I never lost a job because of this disease, but let me tell you, I didn't earn the paycheck that I was being paid, because for 25 years I worked in restaurants. Okay. And I would get high on my own supply. Like, I would go from restaurant to restaurant, because I worked my way through different positions in a restaurant company. And, I was going from restaurant to restaurant, checking on things, and I would eat here, eat like all day long. And so I was really, you know, walking in a blur all day long because I was high all day on food. We had a feeling of uselessness. Well, I can't even think about helping someone else when I am so full of selfishness and self-pity, full of fear. That's, number seven. And number eight, or number six. Number seven is we were unhappy. We couldn't, and number eight, we couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. This is Stephanie. It really should say Stephanie was having trouble with personal relationships. Stephanie couldn't control her emotional nature, because this is me without this spiritual solution, right? And then in the next the next paragraph, they say, well, but when we saw others solve their problems by a simple reliance upon the spirit of the universe, God, right? This God of my understanding, we had to stop doubting the power of God. They're really working hard to convince us that life is unmanageable and I need this spiritual solution. And oh, by the way, it's available to me, right? And I get to decide who and what that power is. It says our ideas didn't work, but the God idea did. And then they talk about, the Wright brothers and their childish faith that they could build a machine that would fly, right? And it says the Wright brothers' almost childish faith that they could build a machine with which would fly was the mainspring of their accomplishment. Without that, nothing could have happened. And it says, we agnostics and atheists were sticking to the idea that self-sufficiency would solve our problems. Well, I don't know about you, but I spent my life thinking that I had to be in charge. I was brought up to believe that you don't, and these were good things because they really helped me in terms of my business career, that, I couldn't rely on other people. I had to make things happen. If I worked hard, I could accomplish amazing things. Well, all of those things are fine and dandy, but I need God. That's all Stephanie's power. And at some point, when I tried to apply Stephanie power to this problem, this soul sickness, this life problem, it didn't work. And it says, when others showed us that God's sufficiency worked with them, we began to feel like those who had insisted the rights would never fly. So I sit back and go, I don't know. And I remember in relapse, looking at, hearing people tell their story and sitting there thinking, well, they don't have it as bad as me. Well, they don't understand, I'm over 250 pounds. I'm miserable. I can't stop eating. They don't understand. Right. But the truth was, you know, this work in these steps to get to power, right? It works for you. Why wouldn't it work for me? I'm not constitutionally incapable. Because I would tell myself that too. Well, maybe it works for them, it won't work for me. But I also knew there was nowhere else to go. Where am I going to go? Diets aren't working. I eat around the pills, right? The diet pills. In fact, I would binge and then I would take the fen after the binge. So I wouldn't eat anymore for the day, right? So it was this crazy trying to control and enjoy my food intake without gaining weight, but it didn't work. Self sufficiency does not work for me. I need God, right? And yeah, God gives us brains. It says the next sentence, logic is great stuff. We liked it. We still like it, right? God gave me a brain to use. But here's the problem, okay? And I'm going to go to the next paragraph. When we became alcoholics, or for us, compulsive overeaters, crushed by a self imposed crisis, we could not postpone or evade. We had to fearlessly face the proposition that God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? And this self-imposed crisis, back to the bedevilments, right? I'm full of self-pity. I'm taking everything personally. People are stepping on me. I'm in pain and I can't see past my own pain and suffering. And I bring on these self-imposed crises, these troubles, like it says on page 62, troubles are of my own making. So I have a choice. I can face the proposition. I can be open to a new way of thinking. I can be open to a new experience with God. Either God is or he isn't, right? And I would add to that, oh, and by the way, and I'm not God, right? So I can make a decision that God is or he isn't. And that means in every aspect of my life. Because if God isn't, if there is no God, I have lived that way in the darkness, right? The darkness of not only compulsively overeating, and for me, that darkness is like being in a prison cell and the door is open and I've created the cell and I see that the door is open, but I can't find my way out. I can't get out. But this crazy thing happens. And for me, with step two, it was, well, maybe, just maybe. I really had to look at it that way. Maybe, just maybe, God will help me. And that maybe, just maybe, enabled me, to allow God to pick me up and walk me out of that cell, right? Out of that darkness. So I have to fearlessly face that proposition and I have to make that choice. Am I in? Are you in? I have that written in my book. Are you in on this way of life? Because this way of life is far better than the way I have lived, in and out of the food, right? And then it says, arrived at this point where I'm like, okay, what's my choice going to be? We're squarely confronted with the question of faith. Some of us had already walked far over the bridge of reason toward the desired shore of faith, right? I have the choice. I can, even if it's a baby step, try and walk towards God and away from self, right? And be open to this possibility, or I can keep going to the bitter end. blotting out, this intolerable situation. And so they do just such a beautiful job of getting me to see that maybe, just maybe, I've been looking at this faith thing, this spiritual thing, this God thing. Maybe I've been looking at it all wrong. And I want to go to the next page, to page 54, because then they talk about, well, haven't I had faith? Haven't I had faith in my own abilities? Hadn't I had faith in, all this idolatry, looking for external things to make me feel better? Hadn't I had faith that, um, if I work hard, I can buy this thing, or if I get married, I'm gonna have this great, like, faith in all of these things. I have been worshiping things. Hadn't I worshiped food? When I'm eating compulsively, I'm not thinking about God. I'm not thinking about you. All I'm thinking about is how I'm going to get what I need. How am I going to get it? How am I going to hide it? How am I going to eat it? How am I going to get rid of it so no one knows? And then how am I going to try and fit into my clothes the next day? So had we not variously worshiped people, sentiment, looking to feel good, looking to feel better, money, the title, ourselves, my wants and needs, I have worshiped those things my whole life, right? And none of those things had to do with pure reason. And neither does this God thing, And here's the thing that I had to realize too, right? How can I, how can my puny human brain really understand this all powerful creator of the universe? I'm never going to be understand I have a human brain. And that's where faith comes into play, because I can't dispute the miracles that are being performed around me or in my life. The fact that I'm sitting here with you 5+ years out of a horrendous relapse where I wanted to die. And I haven't had the obsession to compulsively overeat in all that time. How does that happen? That's a miracle. Or, and my husband, it would be okay for me sharing this, he's in this program also, and he's working towards 5 years of abstinence and recovery as well. How is that miracle? Or the birth of my granddaughter on April 1st and looking at this new life. How can I dispute the miracle of a new life? I didn't create that. God create, like, there's miracles all around me. How can I dispute those miracles? Right? Um, so reason isn't everything, it tells us on the bottom of page 54. And then I want to go to 55 because my husband said this to me this morning as I was getting my coffee. He's like, "Oh, wow, you're so lucky. You get to talk about page 55 and my favorite paragraph in the whole big book." And I looked at him and I said, "Do you want to talk?" I'm just kidding. And he's like, it was a really fun conversation between the two of us. But he's like, "That's my favorite paragraph." And I'd have to say it's one of my favorite paragraphs too. So I want to go right. Well, I want to read the paragraph before that on top page 54. Yet we have been seeing another kind of flight, a spiritual liberation from this world. People who rose above their problems. And that's what I saw. I saw people who had worked these 12 steps to get to this power, to this spiritual solution, who were liberated one day at a time from the desire to compulsively overeat, who were living lives that were not lives outside of these bedevilments, who were living these miracles, not perfectly, and life happens. Like, I just want to preface, life is not perfect, right? Life can be lifey, painful things happen, but have found this spiritual liberation, this God, this power, this new way of life. How could I look at that? And I wrote in my book, and I think I wrote this in my book. I almost get emotional, but I wrote this in my book, Coming Out of Relapse. Maybe me too. Maybe me too. And if you're sitting here wondering if this is available to you, well, I would say maybe you too. And then it says, actually, we were fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. And that doesn't say except for you, Stephanie. It says, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. And I love when Janet talks about, okay, well, God created me. He gave me a heart. He gave me two lungs. He gave me, I think there's two kidneys. I don't know. If not, correct me. But God gave me all of this stuff, right? God created me. And you know what God put inside me? The fundamental idea of Him, right? I ran from meeting to meeting, program to program, food plan to food plan, sponsor to sponsor, human solution to human, looking for a solution to my problem, looking for God, looking for this power. When the whole time you're telling me God has been inside of me because God put the fundamental idea of God inside of me. Holy crap, right? But that's what they're saying. And then this is so important. So this idea of God is within me, but it's obscured. I'm blocked by calamity, which is bad things that happen, right? And bad things do, things happen, things in the world, things to people I love, scary things. Like 3 months ago, my mom was diagnosed with recurrent breast cancer, stage 3. And a week later got COVID and then pneumonia and had to be hospitalized, right? Scary things. But with calamity, here's the difference for me today. I know that God is with me in that calamity, right? I know if I can break through these cataracts or these impediments to connecting and trusting God, right? God is with me, holding me through hard things. And it's not God's fault. And then it may be obscured, I may be blocked because of pomp, which is arrogance and ego, right? My level of entitlement, that I should be treated a certain way, that I should be seen a certain way, or that I'm not going to be okay if I'm not successful or respected. Or, I had some work things that came up this week that really like brought this to light for me again. My arrogance and my ego. If I'm puffing myself up, I'm not looking to God. And then by worship of other things, my body size, my house, my car, having the right clothes, looking a certain way, right? My ability to connect with God is blocked by these things, right? And so it's my job to look at what those things are, to identify the things that block me from believing in and connecting in. And a lot of times for me, trusting in this God of my understanding. And then it says, for faith and a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. Like, how beautiful is this? Because they're saying to me, God is inside of me. And if I can push through and unblock that connection with this power, miracles are going to happen in my life. And I see it happening in other people's lives. Because then they say, well, we finally saw. It's like, Janet uses that example of spiritual cataracts, right? Thankfully, I'm not there yet where I have cataracts that have to be removed, but it's like coming in and removing these things. Like God is here, God is constant, but I'm blocked and I can't see, right? And it says, we finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup just as much as the feelings we have for a friend. And I love that as the feeling we have for a friend, because this faith in God, this relationship with God, it's not just like God is on a throne and I'm like, worshiping this God. God, I get to build a relationship with God. You know, God is my friend. God, God is, you know, as real to me today as my dog sitting on my bed. But God is my friend, right? And sometimes we had to search and seek fearlessly, right? By working these steps to unblock, connect with God, to find this power. But he was there. And and that was the big one for me again. God has always been here. I've just stepped away. I was just blocked from God. And then it says he was as much a fact as we were. We found that great reality, capitalized, another word for God. We found that great reality deep down within us. In the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found. It's an inside job, right? I have to seek honestly and humbly this great reality. And my MO was I'm praying, all right, God, help me as I'm shoving food in my mouth. Or God, help me get this job, right? Or God, please, help my kid, my daughter get into this college. Or all like, and if God didn't do it, I was like, yeah, whatever. Okay, I guess you don't really care, you know? And so today it's like I have to seek God and God's will. And then trust that God, whatever God's will is better than I could imagine for myself. And then it says, and then they give us the map, right? We can only clear the ground a bit. If our testimony helps sweep away prejudice, okay, so unblock, identify these impediments, challenge them, clear away these spiritual cataracts, right? Enables you to think honestly, I have to follow this map, and then encourages you to search diligently, right? And this work we're doing is to search diligently for power within us. If you wish, you can join us on the broad highway. And with this attitude, you cannot fail. And that's a promise, right? It's a promise. Step 2 says we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So that return to sanity, not just with the food, but in life, is a promise. And then I want to go, I wanted to, gosh, where was it? I had a note that I wanted to, hold on, you guys. I had a note. Okay. I want to well, maybe it's too late, but I did want to backtrack a little bit because I think when we talk about, the calamity, the pomp, the worship, or these idols that block me from God, you know, um, Janet talks about, and I think this is really powerful, right? You know, it's my job to root out these idols, right? And look at my triggers because they really do fuel some of these character defects, right? But what I wanted to talk about with these idols and idolatry is, the hypersensitivity. And I wanted to give the example of what happened at work um, and how this is a constant and continuous like deal. So this week, Tuesday, I'm at work and I work for a specific program. And I find out they were trying to interview someone new for that program. No one asked me about it. Okay. And then I hear my work friends outside my office talking about going to a training and no one invited me. Okay. And then there's a project going on and I wasn't invited. Right. And let me tell you that, you know, the idolatry for me in that moment that I had to really look at, and I really had to go to God, like I was completely blocked from God. It was like I was restless, I was irritable. How dare they? No one's treating me well, right? So here, like I meditated that morning, feeling good, connecting with God. And then all of a sudden, my idols crop up. How dare they treat me this way? No one appreciates me. They don't care about my opinion, right? And I can't feel God. And I start to feel the selfishness, the self pity, and I'm struggling, right? And, you know, here's the thing, I have to identify that, I made a phone call, I prayed, I was able to like see, this is all idolatry. This is all Stephanie. This is not God, right? And then I get to pray and say, okay, God, I want you. I don't want to be sitting in this selfishness, you know? And God, something shifts and I can breathe again, right? And I can connect with God again. And so this work instead, it's like daily work. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. Like this being obscured by calamity, pomp, and worship of other things, that's part of the daily work. It's not a one and done. I have to continue to identify what these idols are as they come up and then turn back to God because that is always the solution. My will is never the solution, right? So I have to, go to God and God, please forgive me for looking to, you know, how people perceive me, being the important person at work, being included with all my friends. God, please forgive me for making these idols once again come before you. And please show me how to reconnect with you and what I could and where you would have me, right? So I have to pray, see my selfishness, and then look for someone to help. And that for me is this amazing formula, right? So I know I kind of backtracked there, but I really want to talk about that. Okay, so let me see time wise. Okay, page 56. Our Southern friend, the minister's son. So they talk about, it says, our friend was a minister's son. He attended church school where he became rebellious at what he thought an overdose of religious education. For years, therefore, he was dogged by trouble and frustration, business failure, insanity, fatal illness, lots of calamity, right? We just talked a lot about calamity and a lot about idols, right? It, so these calamities in his immediate family embittered and depressed him. He was full of resentment, post-war disillusionment, which is old, his old beliefs, ever more serious alcoholism, impending mental and physical collapse brought him to the point of self-destruction. I can relate, right? This guy, he's filled with self-pity. He's blocked, by these calamities, full of resentment, struggling with alcoholism, can't stop drinking, right? And he's a minister's son. And he has a lot of knowledge, right, about God. But one night, when confined in a hospital, he was approached by an alcoholic who had known a spiritual experience. Our friend's gorge rose as he bitterly cried out, if there is a God, he certainly hasn't done anything for me, right? He's completely blocked. He's pissed off at God. I get it, because I was pissed off at God in my relapse. I had to forget everything I knew or thought I knew and have a new experience. But then it says, but later, alone in his room, he asked himself this question: is it possible that all the religious people I have known are wrong? Maybe, just maybe. That's how I see that. Maybe, just maybe. While pondering this answer, he felt as though he lived in hell. Then, like a thunderbolt, a great thought came. It crowded out all else. Well, Who are you to say there is no God? And he has this amazing spiritual experience. This man recounts that he tumbled out of bed to his knees. In a few seconds, he was overwhelmed, right, by a conviction of the presence of God. It poured over and through him with certainty and majesty of a great tide at flood, right? And then it says the barriers he had built through the years were swept away. These things that blocked him from this power. He stood in the presence of infinite power and love. And isn't that a beautiful? I picture him on his knees, and light comes, light hits him, and all of a sudden he's in the presence of this infinite power, and he feels God's love. He had stepped from bridge to shore. For the first time, he lived in conscious companionship with his creator. And I didn't have a white light experience like that, but I had an experience where coming out of relapse, I was so pissed off. I was so angry at God. God, you put the food back in my mouth. God, you put these 100 pounds back on my body. God, you're helping everyone but me. God, you suck. It was really like I was so angry. But my first real prayer was, okay, God, a lot of F words, a lot of swearing. I'm really effing pissed off at you. I don't even know if you exist anymore. I don't even know if I want to believe in you. But God, I'm dying. I'm going to die in this. I can't do this. So maybe, I don't know. I don't even know if you're hearing me, but maybe you can help me because I need help. And I was told to talk to you. So here I am. And it was my first honest conversation with God. And something shifted. And every day I had a very similar conversation. And my sponsor had told me, once we get to step 2, you're going to start to feel this power flow in. And I didn't believe it, but I believed her because she had the power. Like God was talking to her. Like I saw what God had done for her, these miracles. And I trusted her before I could even trust God. And within that first week, I wasn't so angry at God. We're still talking, starting to feel the presence, starting to feel something. And the obsession was gone, right? It was a slower, build. But if this God is truly inside of me, and if I really need this power, then this is really about building a relationship with power. And this whole, again, for me, maybe just maybe there is a God, and maybe just maybe this God will help me. And maybe just maybe my life can be different. And then and we see this white light experience for this minister's son. It's our Southern friend in the back of the book. The story starts on page 208, I believe. But they say, thus was our friend's cornerstone fixed in place, the cornerstone, this connection with this God, this power. No later vicissitude, don't even know what that means, can't even barely say it, but has shaken it. His alcoholic problem was taken away by God, one day at a time. I'm not cured. I'm never going to not be a compulsive overeater. My eyes are never going to not be brown, there's I'm never going to be cured. But if I stay connected with this power through work and self-sacrifice for others and put my hand out to help other people, I'm told I get to live this new life, right? And then it says that very night years ago, it disappeared, save for a few brief moments of temptation. The thought of drink has never returned. Isn't that a miracle? And at such times, a great revulsion has risen up in him. And they tell us that in step 10, in the 10-step promises, I will recoil as if from a hot flame. And it says, seemingly he could not drink even if he would. God had restored him to sanity. And so maybe, just maybe, if God can restore this hopeless alcoholic to sanity, or my sponsor, or you, or the folks here on this, meeting, maybe God can do it for me too. What is this but a miracle of healing? Yes. And then they give us the recipe for a miracle. Circumstances made him willing to believe. While this disease beat the crap out of me, to the point where I was in a state of surrender where I had no alternative. I needed power. So circumstances made him willing, right? And then the next part of the recipe, he humbly offered himself to his maker. I need you, God. Please help me, God. I give you everything if you just can help me. And then he knew. And then it says, even so has God restored us all to our right minds. To this man, the revelation was sudden. Some of us grow into it more slowly, but he has come to all who have honestly sought him. I have to really want and seek God. And if I'm not honest, I'm not going to recover. And that means honest with God. If I'm not honestly seeking God, right? I have to honestly, not intellectually, but in my heart of hearts, seek this power. And it says, when we draw near to him, he disclosed himself to us. And that's a promise. When I connect with God, when I spend time with God, when I seek God with every fiber in my body, I see that he's always been here inside of me. And so I think that I'll stop there. Thanks everyone. Yeah. All right.